2 years ago, my own daughter kicked me out of the home I'd built with my bare hands. She shoved a crumpled $10 bill into my palm and told me never to come back. After years of silence, she's suddenly calling me, but I know it's not about family. It's about money. This time, I plan to teach her a lesson she'll never forget. The evening quiet in my Denver study was broken by the sharp trill of the phone. I set down my glass of bourbon and glanced at the screen. Savannah. After 2 years of nothing, she was calling. Outside, rain tapped against the tall windows, blurring the lights of the city into streaks across the dark surface of Sloan's Lake. I'd been going over my property investments, papers spread like a general's battle plans across the oak desk I'd built myself 20 years ago. I let the phone ring twice more before I answered. Hello, Savannah. Dad? Her voice carried that same syrupy sweetness I remembered, the kind she used when she wanted something, but beneath it, I could hear the strain. I've missed you so much. I was hoping you'd come to a family dinner this Saturday. My fingers brushed an old family photograph tucked between my business contracts, 3 smiling faces from another life. I flipped it over. How thoughtful, I said flatly. We could maybe start fresh, she continued, her voice wobbling just enough to sound rehearsed. I know things have been complicated. Complicated, I repeated. That's one way to describe throwing your father out with $10. A silence followed, broken only by the rain. I could hear her breathing change, short and shallow. I don't know what you mean about money, Dad. I just thought. Of course you don't, I interrupted. The lie was as clumsy as it was insulting. Everyone in our old circles knew about my turnaround. My real estate success wasn't exactly a secret. What's the real reason you're calling? I asked. Can't a daughter just want to see her father? She replied, but the desperation in her voice had crept closer to the surface. I took a slow sip from my glass, savoring the oak and fire. 2 years ago, I couldn't afford coffee that didn't come from a vending machine. Now my bourbon cost more than the rent on the motel room I'd once called home. Saturday night, I said. I assume at your place? Yes. Mom's making that roast you used to love. Your mother still playing house with Rick? I asked. They're married now, she said quietly. Well, I replied evenly. Congratulations to the happy couple. I'll be there. Her relief was almost pitiful. Really? Oh, Dad, that's wonderful. We can. I said I'll be there. I cut in. And I think it will be educational for all of us. I ended the call before she could respond, the satisfying click echoing in my office. Outside, the rain streaked the glass as memories I'd buried began clawing back. I walked through my home like a man surveying land he'd conquered. From the marble entryway to the kitchen with its gleaming appliances, everything I owned now stood in sharp contrast to where I'd been just 2 years earlier. But Savannah's call had cracked open a door to the past, and I knew before the weekend was over, I'd be walking her straight through it. The next morning, the Rocky Mountains glowed pink in the distance, the first light bouncing off their snowy peaks. I stood at the window with my coffee, watching the reflection of my own face in the glass. Time has a way of softening memories, but not that day. No, that one stays sharp as a nail. It was July 2023, the day my daughter and my wife decided they'd had enough of me. I'd walked into our modest home in Colorado Springs after a long day repairing a client's rental property. My shoulders ached, my hands were still gritty from dust, but I was looking forward to a quiet dinner. Instead, I found my life already packed into 2 suitcases by the door. At first, I thought there'd been some kind of emergency. But then I saw her, Diane, sitting on the couch beside a tall, silver-haired man I'd never seen before. He was lounging in my spot like he'd been there for years. Cliff's moving in, she said without looking up from her phone. You need to leave. Just like that. 28 years of marriage reduced to a single sentence delivered in the same tone she might have used to order takeout. Before I could respond, Savannah emerged from her room. She had a tote bag slung over one shoulder and a look in her eyes I'll never forget. Not anger, not sadness, but something colder. Something like calculation. "You're a failure, Dad," she said, her voice steady as if she'd been rehearsing it. "Mom's right. You don't belong here anymore." The words knocked the air clean out of me. And then she reached into her purse, pulled out a single $10 bill, and pressed it into my palm. "For gas," she said, as if the gesture were generous rather than humiliating. That was it. No tears. No goodbye. Just the front door closing behind me as the man in my chair reached for the TV remote. The memory followed me into my kitchen that morning as I poured another cup of coffee. My current kitchen was nothing like the one I'd left behind. Granite counters, stainless steel appliances, sunlight pouring through wide windows. Back then, dirty dishes filled the sink, the air smelled of stale coffee and resentment. I'd ended up in a motel off I-25 that first night, the kind of place where you don't walk barefoot on the carpet. The neon sign outside flickered all night, the hum of the highway never stopped. I paid the weekly rate with the crumpled bills I had left, stretching every dollar with instant noodles and gas station coffee. The first weeks were the worst. I took any job that paid cash: construction cleanup, washing dishes at a diner, even unloading trucks in a freezing warehouse at 3 a.m. My hands hardened again, my back complained, but every ache came with a stubborn thought: I'm not done yet. And slowly, the shame began to burn into something else: determination. It was a condemned house in Pueblo that changed everything. I'd scraped together what I could from odd jobs and bought it for $39,000, the kind of place most folks wouldn't touch without a bulldozer. Broken windows, sagging porch, the smell of mildew strong enough to choke you. But I saw potential. I worked 16-hour days fixing that place, learning wiring from YouTube tutorials and plumbing from library books. By winter, it was transformed, warm, solid, ready for a family. I sold it for $62,000, and that profit lit a fire under me. From there, one project turned into two into five. I kept every receipt, every plan, reinvesting each dollar. A foreclosure in Fort Collins became my turning point. Bought for $210,000, restored in 6 months, sold for $440,000. Each success added to my war chest, each lesson sharpened my instincts. By the time Savannah's number showed up on my phone last night, my net worth had crossed 8 figures. And I knew exactly why she was calling. Saturday's dinner wasn't going to be about food. It wasn't even about family. It was about a test, and I already had the answer. By Friday morning, the plan was already taking shape. I had no interest in walking into that dinner unprepared. Savannah had always been clever enough to hide her real intentions behind a smile. But I've played my share of long games, and I know how to smoke out a bluff. The sun rose over Denver, painting the mountains gold while I sat in my study with a fresh mug of coffee. The phone lay on my desk beside a small recorder. My idea was simple: give her a scenario where I wasn't worth a dime anymore, and see how quickly her loyalty disappeared. If she passed the test, maybe there was hope. If not, well, I already had a folder of evidence ready to grow thicker. I practiced the tone twice, not too dramatic, just enough to sound like a man who'd taken a beating. Then I dialed. She answered on the second ring. "Dad! I was hoping you'd call." Her voice was bright, almost too bright, like someone expecting a winning lottery ticket. "Savannah," I began, adding just a tremor to my voice, "I've got bad news. Real bad. The market took a turn yesterday, and I lost almost everything." There was a pause, just long enough for her to calculate before speaking. "What do you mean, everything?" "I'm meeting with bankruptcy lawyers next week," I said, eyes drifting to the actual bank statement on my desk. 8 figures strong. Foreclosure notices will start coming Monday. I'm not sure what's going to happen. The silence that followed wasn't grief or sympathy. It was math. I could almost hear her brain shifting gears. How much is left? She asked finally. Maybe enough for a small apartment, I said. I know this will change our plans for Saturday. It took exactly 12 seconds before she replied. Well, if that's the case, maybe it's best you don't come to dinner. No. We'll figure it out. No. Money doesn't matter. Just a clean cut, like trimming dead branches. I ended the call politely, then sat back and looked at the recorder. The evidence was there: her voice, her priorities, her complete absence of concern for anything but the balance sheet in her head. That afternoon I began digging. Savannah's failed business venture had been all over small claims forums, customers complaining they'd never received the furniture they paid for. One woman wrote she'd saved for months to buy a dining set that never existed. The anger in those messages was fresh, like the wounds hadn't even begun to heal. As for Diane, my ex-wife, she'd reinvented herself online as a health advocate, posting dramatic updates about her supposed medical condition. And yet, in all her photos, she looked like she could run a marathon. I had my suspicions. This was too big for me to tackle alone. So, on Monday, I drove downtown to meet with Marcus Lane, a former FBI agent turned private investigator. His office was on the 14th floor, looking out over Union Station. I need background checks on 2 people, I said as soon as I sat down. One's my daughter. The other's my ex-wife. I want everything: legal records, financial dealings, any trace of fraud. Marcus didn't ask for drama or backstory. He just nodded, slid a contract across the desk, and named his price. I signed without hesitation. 1 week, he said. And if they've done what you suspect, we'll have proof. True to his word, Marcus called me 3 days later. You'd better come in, he said. This is worth seeing in person. When I arrived, 2 thick folders sat on his desk. He opened the first. Your daughter's company, Rustic Haven Interiors. It was never a real store. She collected over $140,000 from customers and delivered almost nothing. The pattern is clear: intentional fraud, not incompetence. The file was full of screenshots, payment records, even fake tracking numbers she'd sent to buyers. She hadn't just made a mistake, she'd built a scam. Marcus opened the second folder. Your ex-wife has raised nearly $200,000 through online fundraisers for a fake illness. Medical records show she's perfectly healthy. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing the scope of it. 2 people who'd once been my family had turned lying into a profession. Marcus closed the folders and looked at me steadily. You have enough here to bury them both, legally or publicly. The question is, how do you want to play it? I knew right then, Saturday's dinner wasn't going to be just a test. It was going to be the opening act of their reckoning. And when the curtain fell, there'd be no doubt left about who they'd underestimated. By Thursday evening, the plan was no longer just an idea. It was a machine with every cog in place. The legal assault on Savannah would be the spearpoint. Marcus had connected me with Merrick Daniels, a seasoned attorney whose reputation for precision in fraud cases was legendary in Colorado. His office, perched high above downtown Denver, smelled faintly of leather and old books, the kind of place where details mattered. Merrick studied the file Marcus had built. This is airtight, he said, flipping through the evidence with surgical focus. Documented payments, customer statements, proof of intent. If we move quickly, we can hit her with a class action suit before she knows what's happening. How quickly? I asked. If you want maximum impact, we can have her served at that dinner you mentioned. Emotional witnesses, nowhere to run. He looked up, reading my expression. I take it you're not looking for a quiet resolution. No, I said. Flat as a hammer strike. I want the consequences to arrive at the same table where they handed me $10 and told me to disappear. Merrick nodded once. Then we'll serve her at exactly 7:30 p.m. I'll have the process server briefed. The second prong of the plan was for Diane. Legal action would take time, but public exposure? That could happen instantly. I met Jessica Grant at a small coffee shop near the Capitol. She was an investigative journalist for the Denver Chronicle, specializing in influencer fraud. Her eyes narrowed as she flipped through Marcus's folder. "This is worse than the usual social media scams," she said, tapping the medical records. "She faked a terminal illness? Took donations from people who thought they were saving her life? That's a story that'll burn across every platform in hours." "That's the idea," I said. "I want it to hit while I'm sitting in her dining room." Jessica smiled faintly. "I can have it live at 8 p.m. sharp, fact-checked, sourced, bulletproof against legal threats. By the time dessert's served, she'll be a headline." Friday was all about coordination. Merrick's team finalized the lawsuit paperwork. 23 defrauded customers signed on, and Jessica's article went through final editorial checks. I spent the day on the phone, personally speaking to several of Savannah's victims. One was a retired nurse who'd paid $3,800 for a handcrafted table that never existed. Another was a young couple who'd used part of their wedding fund for custom chairs Savannah never shipped. Each of them had been dismissed by her with the same arrogance she'd once shown me. Now they'd all have their say in court. Saturday arrived crisp and bright, as if Colorado itself were enjoying the calm before the storm. By 5:30 p.m., the strike was fully loaded. 7:30, Savannah gets served with a class action lawsuit in front of her family. 8 o'clock, Diane's fake illness is exposed in a breaking news article. The 40-minute drive to Colorado Springs gave me plenty of time to rehearse the part I'd be playing, the polite guest, smiling at the very people I was about to dismantle. Savannah's house looked smaller than I remembered, though the warm light spilling from the windows tried to suggest comfort and stability. Diane opened the door with that false enthusiasm she'd always been able to summon on cue. "Harold," she said, her bracelets clinking, "you look great. Success really suits you." "It's good to be back," I replied, stepping into the same foyer where I'd once been handed my $10 parting gift. "Brings back memories." The dining room table was set with her best china, candles flickering. Savannah emerged from the kitchen in a dress clearly meant to impress, though I could see the nerves behind her smile. "Dad," she said, hugging me just long enough for it to register as an act. "I'm so glad you made it." "Water under the bridge," I said, placing a small gift box on the side table. "Brought something special for later." Dinner began with stiff politeness. Diane poured wine, Savannah talked about exciting business opportunities, in vague terms. Rick, the man in my old chair, sat at the edge of the conversation, trying to look involved. Then, right on schedule, Savannah leaned in. "Since you've been so successful, Dad, I was thinking, maybe we could partner on something. 200,000 would solve some short-term cash flow issues and set us up for great returns." Diane added her voice like a backup singer. "Family is about helping each other, after all." I glanced at my watch. 7:29. 200,000? I repeated slowly. "That's very specific." The doorbell rang. Savannah looked confused. "Were we expecting someone?" "How unexpected," I said, keeping my tone light. "Remarkable timing." She went to answer it, and from my seat I could see the man in the suit hand her a stack of documents. "Savannah Brooks?" he asked. "Yes? You're being served with a class action lawsuit for fraudulent business practices. Please sign here to acknowledge receipt." Her face strained of color. "What? This is insane. I'm in the middle of..." But the process server was already walking away. His job done. She turned back toward the table, papers trembling in her hands. I just took another sip of wine. Savannah stood in the doorway clutching the papers like they might dissolve if she gripped them tightly enough. Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then, in a shaky voice, "This is ridiculous. It's a misunderstanding. Mom, tell him." "Sit down," Diane said firmly, though her eyes were darting over the documents like she was searching for an escape clause. "We'll call a lawyer first thing Monday. With your resources, Harold," she added, turning toward me with that smooth tone she'd perfected over decades, "we can get the best legal team in Denver. This doesn't have to be a big deal." I didn't move, didn't even put down my wine glass. "Oh, I think it's going to be exactly as big a deal as it needs to be." Rick shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly unsure which way the wind was blowing. "Maybe we should take a breath," he offered. But Savannah wasn't listening. She was riffling through the lawsuit, her face pale. 23 plaintiffs? $140,000 in damages? I don't have that kind of money. Then perhaps, I said quietly, you should have thought about that before taking it. Her glare was instant, that same fire she'd used to cut me out of her life 2 years ago. But before she could speak, Diane's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, expecting some reassuring message from one of her friends. Instead, her face froze. Her thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling once, twice, then faster as her breathing quickened. "What is this?" she whispered. From across the table, I could see her Instagram feed, and the comment section was a wildfire. Thousands of angry messages flooding in faster than she could read them. One read, "Shame on you for faking cancer." Another, "You stole from sick people. Hope the IRS buries you." And then, pinned to the top of her page, a headline from the Denver Chronicle. "Local influencer exposed for fabricating terminal illness. $200,000 in donations under scrutiny." Savannah turned toward her mother. "What is that supposed to mean? You told everyone you had." "Lies," Diane said sharply, though her voice lacked conviction. "All lies." Rick, leaning over her shoulder now, wasn't convinced. "Diane, do you actually have?" He stopped himself, realizing the answer before he finished the question. The notifications were relentless. Screenshots of her medical records. Excerpts from interviews with people who donated to her treatments. Links to IRS regulations about unreported income. It was all there, live for the world to see. By now, I'd set my wine glass down. "Quite the evening, isn't it? First your daughter's business is revealed for the fraud it is, now this medical miracle of yours." Diane's head snapped up. "You planned this." "I gave you both exactly what you once gave me," I said evenly. "Accountability." Savannah's voice cracked as she looked between us. You knew about this? You wanted this to happen?" "I find it fascinating," I replied. "How quickly family loyalty appears when there's money or legal trouble involved." The room was unraveling. Rick had pushed his chair back, putting distance between himself and Diane. Savannah kept scanning the lawsuit like the words might rearrange themselves into something less damning. Diane was furiously deleting comments, but every time she removed one, 3 more appeared. "This isn't over," Diane said, her voice low and shaking. "You can't just—" "Oh, but it is over," I interrupted. "You built your lives on lies. You cashed in on other people's trust. Now the bills come due." I stood, straightened my jacket, and picked up the empty gift box I'd brought. "Inside here," I said, "is the only thing I ever owed you, the truth. You both value it about as much as you did the $10 you gave me 2 years ago." I walked toward the door, but Savannah's voice stopped me. "We're family, Dad. You can't just leave us like this." I turned back, my hand on the doorknob. 2 years ago, you made it very clear what family meant to you. Tonight, you learned what it means to me. and then I stepped outside into the cool Colorado night. Leaving the sound of chaos behind me, Diane's phone still buzzing with incoming notifications, Savannah's voice climbing into panic, and Rick quietly asking himself what kind of people he tied himself to. In the driveway, I looked back at the house one last time. The warm light from the dining room windows no longer looked inviting. It looked like the glow of a fire inside a building that was already collapsing. The drive back to Denver felt lighter somehow. Justice, when done properly, has a way of making the air feel cleaner. 4 months later, I was standing barefoot on the soft sand of a Hawaiian beach, watching the sun dip into the Pacific. The ocean breeze smelled of salt and hibiscus, and somewhere behind me, a local band was playing slow, easy island tunes. It was a long way, in every sense, from that flickering neon motel room where I'd landed after Savannah and Diane had thrown me out with $10. That morning, Merrick had called with the final update on Savannah's case. "Harold, the judge didn't pull any punches," he said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well executed. "She's been ordered to pay $153,000 in restitution, plus court costs. The judgment notes the systematic nature of her fraud. That's why it's the maximum allowed." "And the criminal charges?" I asked. "Felony fraud. 3 years probation, hundreds of hours of community service, and a permanent criminal record. Anyone who runs a background check will see it." I pictured her standing in a fluorescent-lit community center, scrubbing floors or handing out canned goods, her manicured nails chipped, her smile gone. Maybe she'd learned something from being surrounded by people who actually understood hardship. Diane's fall had been equally thorough, but far more public. Jessica's article had been the spark, but the fire kept spreading. Other reporters dug deeper, and soon every donation, every supposed treatment she'd claimed to undergo, every unexplained bank deposit was exposed. The IRS investigation uncovered over $200,000 in unreported income. Between the penalties, the back taxes, and the legal fees, she lost every asset she'd collected during her little charade. Her prized luxury SUV was repossessed. The faux designer handbags she'd flaunted online disappeared into evidence boxes. By the time the audit was over, she was living in a one-bedroom apartment and working night shifts for a commercial cleaning service. Her Instagram account was banned, her sponsors gone, her name synonymous with deceit. Rick filed for divorce in May, citing irreconcilable differences in the paperwork. He kept his business assets intact, but I doubt his pride will ever recover. I took another slow breath of that Hawaiian air, letting the details settle in my mind like the final pieces of a puzzle. It wasn't about the money I'd made, though I had plenty now. It wasn't even about revenge for the $10 humiliation. It was about the principle that you can't betray people and expect to walk away clean. For 2 years I'd carried that wound. But now, with both of them stripped of the power they'd used to hurt others, I could finally set it down. Back in Denver, my life had grown in ways I hadn't expected. My real estate portfolio was expanding, smart buys, honest renovations, properties that actually improved neighborhoods instead of bleeding them dry. And there was Rebecca, a sharp-minded attorney I'd met in Yellowstone the month before. She understood hard work, respected honesty, and had no patience for manipulative games. We'd spent the week hiking, trading stories, and watching the stars from a cabin porch. It was the kind of connection that felt solid from the start. "You seem lighter," she said one evening as we watched the sunset over the Lamar Valley. "I guess I finally put something heavy down," I told her. "Some people earn a place in your life. Others just occupy it until you realize their true value." The truth is, the $10 Savannah pressed into my hand that day wasn't really an insult. It was an assessment, what she thought my worth was. The mistake she made was thinking I agreed. Now, my worth isn't measured in their approval, or their absence. It's measured in the integrity of the people I let close, in the work I do, and in the peace I feel waking up every morning knowing I don't owe a thing to anyone who hasn't earned it. Some days, I wonder if Savannah is learning anything from her time at the homeless shelter where she's serving out her community service hours. Maybe she's looked into the eyes of someone who truly has nothing and thought about the people she stole from. As for Diane, I doubt she'll change. Narcissists rarely do. But her reach is gone. She can't hurt anyone the way she used to. The waves rolled in, foaming white against the shore, and I thought about heading back to the small oceanfront rental I'd chosen, not out of necessity, but because it was exactly where I wanted to be. Tomorrow, I'd fly back to Denver, where another property deal was waiting. Another honest investment, another brick laid in the life I was building. 2 years ago, they'd left me with $10 and a suitcase. Now I understood that the real wealth I'd gained had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with walking away from the people who'd tried to convince me I wasn't worth keeping. The plane touched down in Denver under a clear autumn sky, the kind that makes the Rockies look carved from blue stone. As I drove back toward my house, I thought about the last 2 years, the slow climb from humiliation to stability, from stability to strength, from strength to something else entirely. Survival had been my only focus at first. That neon motel room, the smell of industrial cleaner, the constant hum of trucks on the highway outside. I told myself every night that if I could just keep moving forward, I'd eventually get out. But once I had money in the bank again, the question became, what now? Money was just the fuel. The real engine was purpose. And now that I wasn't just surviving, I wanted to build something that lasted longer than a quick profit. I pulled into my driveway, the late afternoon sun spilling gold across the front of the house. From the street, it looked like any other luxury home, stone facade, landscaped yard, wide glass windows. But to me, it was proof of every nail I'd driven and every sleepless night I'd endured. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar from the custom shelving in my study. My desk was clear except for the latest property files. Each one represented a chance to improve something broken, to take the abandoned, the neglected, and make it new again. Maybe that's why the revenge against Savannah and Diane had felt so complete. I hadn't just destroyed what they built on lies, I'd replaced it with something honest. Rebecca stopped by that evening with a bottle of wine. She'd just come from court, still in her navy suit, her hair pulled back in that no-nonsense way I'd come to admire. "You really are different here," she said as we sat out on the deck, the city lights flickering below us. "How so?" I asked. "You're not chasing something anymore," she said. "You're building. There's a difference." I thought about that for a moment. She was right. Back in those first desperate months, every move I made had been about getting away from where I was. Now, every move was about creating something worth keeping. Still, some shadows don't disappear entirely. Earlier that week, I'd gotten a thin, handwritten letter from Savannah. The return address was a halfway house just outside Colorado Springs, part of her probation program. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. She wrote about the community service at the homeless shelter, about the difficult people she had to deal with, and how unfair it was that the system treated her like a criminal. Not once did she mention the customers she'd stolen from. Not once did she apologize. I put the letter back in its envelope and slid it into the bottom drawer of my desk. Some people aren't ready for redemption, and you can't drag them there. Diane hadn't tried to contact me directly, but I'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that she was struggling to find steady work. Most employers didn't want the public relations nightmare of hiring someone whose name still floated around the internet tied to fraud articles. She'd burned her bridges, and the smoke hadn't cleared. Rick had sold the house they'd once shared, probably to cover his legal fees from the divorce, and moved into a small condo downtown. I wondered if he ever sat in that living room at night and thought about the day I'd walked in to find him in my chair. In my own house, things were quieter. I'd started setting aside part of my profits to create a small scholarship fund for trade school students. Kids who didn't want to sit in a classroom for 4 years but had the drive to build something with their hands. It felt like a way to take all the lessons I'd learned, the hard way, and give someone else a head start. Later that night, I stood at the window with a cup of tea, watching the headlights snake through the streets below. Somewhere out there, people were still playing the same games Savannah and Diane had played, thinking they could manipulate their way into comfort. But the truth always finds a crack to slip through. And when it does, it doesn't knock, it kicks the door wide open. I wasn't interested in chasing them anymore. My energy was better spent on the things that lasted: solid walls, honest work, and relationships that could survive without leverage or lies. Part of me suspected that one day, Savannah might try again, not for money, but for some version of connection. Maybe she'd get tired of the walls she'd built around herself. Or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, I'd be fine. I didn't need anything from her. I didn't need anything from Diane. For the first time in decades, my life wasn't defined by what they thought of me, and that was worth more than any dollar amount I'd ever made. It was late February when it happened. Denver had one of those brittle winter mornings, the kind where the air snaps at your face, and the sunlight is bright but cold. I'd stopped by a hardware store on Colfax to pick up some specialty drill bits for a renovation project. Nothing remarkable. Until I stepped out into the parking lot and saw her. Savannah. She was standing near the bus stop, bundled in a worn coat that looked 2 sizes too big, the kind you get from a thrift store donation bin. Her hair was pulled back in a loose knot, her makeup minimal. In one hand she clutched a paper coffee cup, in the other, a canvas tote stuffed with folders. For a second, she didn't see me. She was staring down at the sidewalk, shifting her weight from foot to foot like she was trying to keep warm. I could have kept walking. Could have gotten into my truck, driven away, and left that image of her in my rearview mirror. But my boots crunched the ice, and she looked up. "Dad?" Her voice was quiet, almost uncertain. Not the sharp, confident tone she used when she thought she had leverage. Just one word, like she was testing how it might sound again. We stood there in the parking lot, either of us moving closer. Cars hummed past on the street, the smell of exhaust mixing with the cold air. "Savannah," I said finally. She gave a half shrug. "Didn't expect to see you here." I could say the same. There was an awkward pause. She glanced toward the bus stop, then back at me. "I'm trying to get things together," she said. "The shelter's been eye-opening." I didn't respond right away. I'd learned that silence can be more powerful than words. It makes people fill the space with what they really mean. "I know I messed up," she added, her voice barely above the street noise. I don't even know where to start fixing things." For a moment, I saw flashes of the little girl she used to be, running through the backyard with a plastic tiara on her head, her hands sticky from popsicles, yelling for me to watch her cartwheel. But that image sat alongside another, her standing in the doorway 2 years ago, telling me I didn't belong in my own home. "Starting over isn't easy," I said finally. "But it's not complicated. You tell the truth. You make amends. And you keep showing up for the people you've wronged, even when they don't want you around." Her eyes flickered down. "And if they never forgive you? Then you live your life in a way that makes their forgiveness unnecessary." The bus pulled up. Brakes squealing. She hesitated, as if she might ask me for something: money, a ride, a second chance. But instead, she just nodded. "Okay," she said, almost to herself. She stepped onto the bus without looking back. I stood there for a long moment, watching it pull away, the exhaust cloud dissolving into the cold air. Then I turned toward my truck. Driving home, I kept thinking about that moment, not as an invitation to reopen old doors, but as proof that maybe, just maybe, she'd begun to understand the cost of the choices she'd made. Whether she'd actually pay that cost was up to her. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to see how her story ended. Because mine had already moved on. Back at the house, I walked into my study and placed the bag of drill bits on the desk. Through the window, the city was waking up, sunlight catching on rooftops, smoke curling from chimneys. Somewhere out there, my crew was already working on the latest renovation. Another house being stripped of rot, rebuilt from the inside out. The thought made me smile. I'd learned that buildings and people aren't so different, both can be repaired, but only if someone's willing to put in the work, day after day, without cutting corners. And some are better left as lessons. That night, I poured a single glass of bourbon and stepped out onto the deck. The air was crisp, the sky scattered with winter stars. I thought about Savannah's quiet. Okay. About Diane's silence since her public collapse. About how much distance there was now between the man I'd been and the man standing here. The past was still part of me. But it no longer owned me. Spring came early that year. By late March, the snow along the Front Range had melted into trickling streams, and the air carried that faint scent of fresh earth and thawing pine. I was in the backyard one Saturday morning, hands deep in the soil, planting a new row of juniper along the fence. It struck me then how much of my life now was about planting. Not just in gardens, but in everything I touched, projects, relationships, even my own habits. I was putting down roots in places that would last. 2 years ago, my life had been all demolition. Stripping away what was rotten, hauling off the debris. Necessary work, but hard on the soul. Now, it was about building, and leaving something better behind. That afternoon, Rebecca stopped by with lunch. We sat on the deck, the sun warm on our faces, watching a pair of hawks circle high over the foothills. "You ever think about moving?" she asked. "Starting fresh somewhere else?" I shook my head. "This is where I rebuilt. Every nail, every brick in my life now, it's here. Leaving would feel like walking away from the proof." She smiled, understanding. "You've turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into the foundation for the best version of your life." I hadn't thought of it that way before, but she was right. I still heard bits of news now and then. Diane had tried to start an online consulting service, but it fizzled within weeks. Her name was too tainted, the internet too permanent. She was still cleaning offices at night, still living small, still pretending on social media that she was choosing a simpler life. Savannah had finished her community service and was working part-time at a thrift store. Whether that was humility or necessity, I didn't know. She hadn't reached out again since the bus stop, and I hadn't chased her. Some relationships, I learned, can't be rebuilt from the top down. You have to start at the foundation. And sometimes, that foundation is cracked beyond repair. The thing is, I wasn't angry anymore. Revenge had been satisfying, yes, but it wasn't what gave me peace. The peace came from the life I'd built after the revenge was done, a life that didn't require anyone else's downfall to feel worthwhile. I'd learned to value the quiet moments, coffee in the morning sun, the smell of sawdust in a freshly sanded room, the sound of a new door clicking perfectly into place. Those were the rewards that lasted. One evening, I pulled out the old silver frame from the back of my desk drawer, the last family photo before everything fell apart. There we were, me, smiling like a man who thought the ground beneath him was solid. Diane, perfect hair and perfect teeth hiding the rot underneath. Savannah, young enough to still pretend her affection was unconditional. I looked at it for a long time. Then I took the photo out of the frame and set it in the bottom of the fire pit on the deck. The paper curled quickly, the colors turning to ash. When the wind caught it, the last of their smiles lifted into the night sky and were gone. The following week, I closed on a new property in the Highlands, a rundown Victorian with good bones. As I walked through its creaking halls, I could already see the finished version in my mind: polished wood, fresh paint, sunlight spilling across restored floors. It would take months of work, but I knew how to handle that. I'd done it before, with houses, with my life. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about that $10 bill Savannah had given me the day she told me to leave. At the time, it felt like an insult carved into my skin. Now I saw it for what it really was, a blessing in the ugliest wrapping. Without that shove, I might never have built the life I have now. On a warm April evening, Rebecca and I sat outside as the sun dipped low, painting the mountains in gold and deep purple. She reached over and took my hand. "You seem steady," she said. "Like nothing could knock you off balance." "Not nothing," I said. "But the things that could? I don't let them close anymore." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of blooming lilac from the neighbor's yard. Somewhere down the street, a kid was riding a bike, the sound of the tires on pavement echoing faintly. Life, simple and good, was happening all around us. 2 years ago, they'd left me standing in the driveway with $10 and no home. Today, I stood on ground I'd rebuilt myself, stronger than before, unshakable, and entirely my own. And that, I realized, was the only kind of wealth that could never be taken away.